Republican Jordan Pace is now the new South Carolina House District Representative for District 117, Berkeley County, after defeating Crystal Matthews on Tuesday night. I talked one-on-one with Jordan about what he'll do in Columbia for his district for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
State Representative-elect Jordan Pace, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Obviously, you are the new state representative for House District 117, which is Berkeley County. And I want to go to your Facebook page because you said this quote, I actually have a lot of thank yous to share. Thank you to the people of South Carolina, House District 117, for your votes of confidence tonight. Let's ask you, where was your confidence on Tuesday night?
I was hoping it was going to be with the voters, and the voters have confidence in me, and it turned out to be the case. So I was pretty happy with the outcome.
And you also said this too, I will do my best to honor that confidence in the state house. What else will you honor, state representative?
My hope is to honor not only their confidence in me, but my intentions at the outset of this contest was to bring civil conversation and a sense of civility back to the conversation of civil discourse, being able to disagree with other members of the legislature agreeably rather than with outrageous diatribes and contention. So, but also keeping to solid principles, conservative principles at the same time. So that'll be the balancing act.
How do you balance those principles with those conversations?
Yeah, so we have this misnomer, this bad idea in our society right now. There's a lot of opinions of where it came from, where if you disagree with someone, that means you must hate them, you don't like who they are. When at some point in the past, I'm very confident people were able to disagree on policy and still be able to have a decent conversation with the other person and not think that the other person is out to get them or out to destroy the world. My hope is we can bring that back. As far as like how do you balance those things?
Yes, sir.
At the end of the day, as a representative, it's my vote that goes up on the board, that determines where I stand on policy and where I stand on those principles. That doesn't mean that I won't have sometimes even heated conversations with my colleagues up there, but my attitude is that they're worthy of respect, and I'm going to treat them respectfully, even when we disagree. Whether or not they do that with me or not, I can't control it, but I can control how I talk to them.
And what values do you stand on right now, as well as those principles?
Yeah, our values are based, our worldview, is another way to put that, is that every person is worthy of respect, and primarily because they're made in the image of God, and whether or not they agree with me or not doesn't really matter as far as that baseline respect goes. Other values are that people know how to spend their money better than the government does. So my goal as a policymaker would be for individuals, for families, to be able to keep more money in their pockets, the money that they earn, rather than hand it over to the government for bureaucrats or whoever to do with what they will. The parents and families know how to educate their children better than government does. So the hope is to expand education opportunities to everybody, not just those with means. I can go on and on. Yeah, I can talk policy for days.
I know I got to get you back on Quintin's Close-Ups for that in the winter. But let me ask you that, because you basically, what you just mentioned to me, you mentioned to Layla Gula on Fox 24, but you said families and individuals know how to spend their money better than the government does. So what is the tax base right now in your district?
So the tax base, like what kind of income, is that what you mean?
Well, how much money is coming into your district?
I haven't seen those statistics yet. These different lines are new. Honestly, I don't even know if the Department of Revenue knows statistics of that detail. It's definitely on the higher end of districts throughout the state. We got Nexton, Cane Bay, Carnes Cross, all these high growth areas. A lot of folks coming in from out of state, so they're coming in with high expectations. A lot of conversations I've had with these folks that are transplants. They're leaving states with really, really high taxes, or really, really crazy cultural stuff going on, and the reason they've left those places to come here is as a refuge from what they would call that craziness. Sadly, what they find out when they get here is some of that crazy is not far behind, and we have the highest taxes in the South, and that's something we need to improve upon. We're not competitive with our neighbors with our income taxes, so that's something we can. I would love to improve upon. Get that income tax to zero, like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Alaska, Washington State, New Hampshire. There's a lot of states that don't have an income tax, and I think we can do that as a high tourism state with a lot of manufacturing. It's worth looking at. So that's.
So let me ask you this, State Representative. So when you talk about that, obviously that topic, let me ask you this: what is the regional income right now for your district?
Regional income?
Yes, sir.
So the state income per household, I think, is running about 52,000. Ours is probably a little bit on the higher end, probably closer to that 80 to 85. The new growth areas is going to be higher than some of the older places. Sangareese, obviously, not as high as Nexton.
Right.
Just the home values are a lot higher. But Nexton is literally adjacent to a neighborhood called Tramway. So you have to go across Highway 17 and see there's some differences there.
Yeah.
But the values of those people, I think, are very, very similar, which if Tuesday night's election is any account of that, I think it seems to be true. Like the values that they hold, that people know better than the government has to spend money, kind of the traditional family values mentality seems to be a shared thing amongst everybody, regardless of their income.
So what were those family values that drove people to the voting booths on early voting days and election day?
Well, I think one thing is talking to people like they're people and not treating people differently based on the way that they look or because of their political persuasion. The former incumbent of this position made it pretty well known. It was made pretty well known for her, the things that she said, that's not the way she operated. So I think this is a rebuke of that. Excuse my phone ring. So that's one of those things is treating people well.
Yes, sir. And I know you got to run here, but let me ask you, you talk about that new growth area. So what are the regional growth pressures for District 117?
Yeah, so as far as infrastructure, two big things.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Two of the biggest things is roads and schools. Now, roads is been an ongoing issue in South Carolina for many decades. I'd argue the root of the problem goes all the way back to the 1950s when they moved the SCDOT moved to the governance system that we're in now, where the legislature, essentially like 3 or 4 members of the legislature, control the whole DOT board. Then back in the 90s, when they added the infrastructure bank to the DOT system,
right,
those same couple of legislators control the funding for new projects through that system, through the infrastructure bank. For the past 12 years, really, one guy controlled both of those systems. A guy named Hugh Leatherman, who just a senator from Florence who passed away last year.
Right.
So when we get down to the root of the issue of the roads, we've spent a tremendous amount of money on roads. They've raised taxes. The largest tax hike in state history 6 years ago was to supposedly pay for roads. We haven't seen the dramatic increase that we were promised. Which at the time I opposed that tax hike because it was a governance issue, not a money problem. The other side of that governance issue is, again, back in the 1950s, they did this on purpose for the state to control the vast majority of roads in the state of South Carolina. Something like 44,000 miles of roads is directly controlled and maintained by DOT rather than counties. and localities. It was that way on purpose for the legislator to maintain control over those local areas, and for legislative leadership to be able to put pressure on other legislators to say, hey, if you don't vote for my bill for X, Y, and Z, I'll make sure your district doesn't get funding for their roads. And that happened. I've talked to legislators in as far back as 30 years ago, as soon as just a few years ago, who were told that by the people or person who used to be in charge of all this road stuff, that their district wouldn't get any highway funding if they didn't vote the way they were told.
Wow.
So the solution to that isn't throwing more money at it; it's to decentralize the problem. Take those 44,000 miles of roads. About 14,000 miles of those roads are less than half-mile increments. They're these tiny little stubs of roads. Take most of those, everything except for major highways and interstates, and over the course of time, not all at once, maybe over the course of 4 or 5 years, distribute those down to counties. According to DOT, the only 2 counties in the state can't maintain roads faster, better, and cheaper than DOT can. I think it was like Kershaw and Allendale. There's more people, there's more deer than people in those counties.
Right.
So the vast majority of counties can do it better, faster, cheaper. That's roads, bridges. They already have a system to fund this called C funds. It's usually not a lot of money every year, but I think Berkeley County gets enough to pave like 7 miles of roads. But the system's there. So if we distribute the roads down, have DOT come up with some kind of formula, X amount of dollars per roads per year to maintain them, and amplify, take the DOT's budget that they use to maintain roads and distribute that down to counties accordingly, then counties be able to take care of roads better than the state.
So how many roads are there in Berkeley County now?
I don't know that off the top of my head. A lot.
Well, then let me ask you, how much money from the DOT budget would come to Berkeley County if that were to be the case?
So that would be based on whatever algorithm the mathematicians come up with. That's going to be the engineers, those mathematicians, and the budget guys get together. As a legislator, my job is to say to those guys, hey, this is what we want to do as a broad, 30,000-foot view. We need you guys with technical expertise to figure this out and come back to us and get approval. That way, the county council, I already talked to county council in Berkeley County. Right. They're on board with it. They think their staff, in reality, they know the roads. They travel the roads more than 90% of the legislators in Columbia, because they don't live here.
Right.
The county council does.
Right.
And I'm just one guy out of 127 guys in the House. There's 46, I think, in the Senate.
Right.
So Berkeley County's delegation is only less than a dozen. So it's much easier for local people to keep their county council accountable for roads, given that opportunity, than it would be to hold whoever's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, who might live in Anderson or Greenwood or somewhere far away. That system of accountability would be better.
So how many infrastructure projects are in the works currently in your district?
A lot. And sadly, the county's even just passed an extension of the 1 cent sales tax.
Right.
The vast majority of the roads from the previous iteration of it and now this future iteration of it are state roads. So we're being double taxed to maintain roads that the state taxes should pay for. So the counties are stepping in to do this, and it's costing us more money.
Wow.
So there's a lot of projects in the pipeline to go the other side of that, the school problem.
Oh, yes.
There's about according to the Realtors Association, something like 100 people a day for the last 2 years have been moving to Charleston metro area.
Oh.
Many of them, if not most of them, are moving to Berkeley County because Charleston County seems to be full.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot else. Unless you're going to Audendale or Ravenel or somewhere, you can't really build anywhere else in Charleston County. There's these wetlands and swamps and rivers and everywhere else. The problem with being on a peninsula. So Berkeley County's experiencing this rapid, crazy growth. No matter how much money the school district has, they could get $300 million next year just gifted to them. It is physically impossible to build schools fast enough to keep up with that kind of growth. There's not enough time in the day to put bricks on top of each other to keep up with that. Plus, all the permitting, environmental impact studies. I was listening to a podcast today talking about environmental impact studies because I'm that kind of nerd that listens to podcasts about environmental impact studies. The average impact study is over 600 pages. That's on average. Most of the mode rather than the average is something like 1,000 pages per project. To complete, there's this thing called NIPA, like the Natural Environmental Protection Act. And this isn't to like analyze and see if it's going to be a negative impact or positive impact. It's just to record the impact. So this is not even to get approval. It's just you have to do this for archival purposes. So given all that, there's no way a school district, given unlimited money, can keep up with the growth. The only way we can keep up with that, whether that's high growth here in Berkeley County, York County, Horry,
Right.
Greenville, and there's a lot of places experiencing this. Again, it's this idea of decentralization. A centralized system is not nimble enough to keep up with changes. So the legislature has almost passed it last year, and the speaker has said that its priority is in the caucus, I think, that's the hope, to pass some sort of education freedom measure. Maybe something like Arizona did with the education savings account. It might look like a refundable tax credit. We're not really sure how it's going to look, but essentially the idea there is much like charter schools. Right. The state money would follow the student wherever that student's family decides to send the student. So whether it's a government school, charter school, private school, homeschool. The idea there is if we already saw some teachers do this during the height of COVID, left the school system, started their own little pods of homeschooling pods. But a few families get together, pay the teacher, and the teacher would teach. I think we'd see that kind of entrepreneurial spirit enacted. Like if I know my kids need a school, there's not a school in my area, I can start a school. And there's organizations to help do this. If people want to start schools, communities, churches, whoever, they know the money's there, $7,000-8,000 a year per student, then they can kick it off and start it. I've had conversations with pastors throughout the area that have buildings, fairly sizable buildings that are mostly open during the week, and they are totally on board with the idea of either leasing those, letting new schools use those for free, or starting schools themselves to meet the needs of the community.
So how many students right now in 117 are actually being homeschooled?
I don't know the exact numbers. If we could take the national average and break that down. Okay. This is a statistic that surprised me. Over the last 2 years, the fastest growing demographic of the population that is homeschooling is African American moms. Something like 16% nationwide growth in the African American community of homeschooling. Like, it was the biggest by far.
And I'm running out of time a little bit because I got to get to the next interview.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. Well, man, how much does the state pay per pupil in your district?
So the state average is about $7,400 per student per year. Berkeley County in total spends about $16,000 per student per year by 2020 numbers. I don't know what the average is. Charleston County is like $22,000 per student per year.
Wow.
And if you go by like achievement, that is a lot of money for not a lot of achievements for most of Charleston County. Berkeley's a little bit better, but for the money that we're spending, to give an example.
Yes, sir.
The First Baptist School downtown.
Oh, yes.
Not exactly what you think of as like a budget private school. Is I think $17,000 per year, and they're spending less per year than Charleston County than like a student at Burke or Baptist Hill is being spent. Northwood Academy up here in my district, it's a private school. It's $8,000 per year. They have football programs. They have sports. I mean, they have technology. They have just about everything you find in a government school for $8,000 a year.
Wow.
And their college placement rate is like above 98%. So it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of choice, flexibility, what works best for the student. In government schools, being one size fits all, one, they're not great for the student, being one size fits all, and they can't keep up with the growth. So that's what I'm hoping we can achieve. And hopefully this first year, I'm a new guy coming in. I'm not planning to, I know there's limitations to being the new guy.
Sure.
So I don't want to overpromise, but that would be some of my goals is to work with other legislators to get those things done.
So where is that flexibility in your district now?
There's not a whole lot. I mean, if you can afford it, you can. People with means have always been able to effectively have education freedom. You know, if you can afford a house in Mount Pleasant, you could send your kid to Wanda. If you go to, for in the Charleston County example,
yes,
like if you can afford a house in the area or to live in the area, then you can go where the good schools are. But if you can't, you're stuck. And Tim Scott says this all the time, like a student's success shouldn't be determined by their zip code. But when you have government schools monopolizing the whole system, we have really great teachers in these schools. We have really great administrators. It's not the teachers or the administrators. It's the system. Like if you have a car, you can really great gas, really good oil, the best antifreeze on the market. But if the system is jacked up, it's not going to work. No matter how good the ingredients are. You have a really, really good piston set, but if your spark plugs are gone, you're not going to have a working engine. So it's not the individual parts that are necessarily something wrong with them. It's the system as a whole that's problematic. It's just too stiff to fit everybody's needs.
And quickly, I wanted to ask you, what else are they monopolizing when it comes to school choice?
Well, when I say monopolizing, everybody has to pay property taxes, whether it's on a car, house. Right. Even if you rent, you actually pay more in property taxes through your rent than somebody who owns their house. So we're seeing, I don't know, call $5,000 to $7,000 a year, maybe more if your house is worth more, less versus something like that. Right. But on average, probably talking about $5,000 to $7,000 a year. Wow. That's what's going out of everybody's family budget per year or more. If they didn't have to pay that, then they could spend that money, and that's kind of the equivalent of what the state spends on education where they want to spend it, rather than the government saying, give us this money, or we're going to take your property, we're going to take your house, etc. So effectively that forces them into the government schools unless they just have an abundance of resources to pay that and pay $8,000 a year to send them to private school. So that's what I mean by monopolization. Right. There's nobody saying you have to use the government schools, but effectively, by taking that money from the family, they're saying you're going to have to use the government schools because you're already paying for it.
And quickly, State Representative Pace, let me ask you, you talk about obviously homes being built at a fairly consistent rate in your district. Mm-hmm. So how many schools do Berkeley County actually have to build to keep up with that growth in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, they just passed this referendum to raise the sales tax another cent on top of the road cent in order to build, I think it's about 10 schools, K through 8 schools, and maybe one high school. But by the time those are built, if we keep this growth up, they're going to need a dozen more, probably more than that. I mean, when they built Cane Bay High School 10 years ago, 12 years ago, within 2 years, it was full. It was at capacity, and they had mobile, like trailer classroom. Sure. It's the same way at Cane Bay Middle. Right. Now, both of them are so full that if you buy a house in Cane Bay, you might not be able to send your kids to Cane Bay schools. They may have to get bused, or you may have to take them to Westview or Berkeley or somewhere else because they can't build a best. I mean, they're building a middle school in my neighborhood, and by the time it's done, it's going to be full because my neighborhood's going from 2,500 houses. Lennar bought it 2 years ago. We're moving it to, according to them, they're going to build 10,000 more housing units just in this neighborhood. Oh. So that's, if averaging 2.5 people per household, right? 25,000 people in my neighborhood. Wow. Yeah. So there's just no way they can build it fast enough.
Wow. And I wanted to talk to you more about that in the next interview that I want to do, but I got to run to Ms. Carroll here. But quickly, that gas tax increase, how much is that, and where should it be right now?
So they passed it 6 or 7 years ago to go up 2 cents a year. Yeah, 2 cents a year for 6 years, total of 12 cents.
Wow.
that's supposed to have gone into a separate account from the general fund,
Right.
where the bulk of the gas tax still goes into the general fund. There's one big pot of money with all the other taxes. It was supposed to go to a separate account to exclusively go to widening projects, resurfacing, expansions, things like that. Sadly, something like 75% of the money collected, so almost $1 billion, is sitting in an account doing nothing. It's been sitting there for years. They've spent like $300 million total out of the more than $1 billion they've raised through that effort, and our roads are still where they're at.
And how much money should it be funded to, obviously, for your infrastructure projects in your district?
How much, like each one individually?
Yes,
that's up to the engineers, and they figure out the cost of those things, and especially with the inflation in the last few years, that's gone a lot.
Wow.
So, like I said, it's not a spending issue. Spending on, like, DOT's budget went up millions and millions of dollars every year for about a decade. In the midst of that tax increase, they lowered their maintenance budget as their total budget went up. Right, that's the face you're supposed to make. Why did they lower the maintenance budget when they're building, all these, when the total budget is going up by tens of millions of dollars? These are questions that need to be asked, that I hope to ask.
Yes.
And, we got new leadership in the House. I think they have similar questions.
Yes,
and hopefully we'll get some answers to them.
And quickly, and I got to go run to Ms. Carroll, but she just joined the meeting. But should this, okay, with the DOT and the State Infrastructure Transportation Bank, should those people be voted into office instead of being appointed?
Now, what we should do, I think, like I said, is mainly distribute most of those roads down to counties. And if we're still going to have a DOT commission, have the governor appoint them and the legislature approve them, much like we do, most other things, rather than 2 or 3 legislators control the whole process. Because the governor's accountable to everybody, rather than 2 or 3 legislators only accountable to their voters in their districts.
Oh, yes. And I hope to continue this conversation in 2023 when I talk to you again. But
sure.
State Representative-elect Jordan Pace, thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.